I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm glad to see you all. Diversity, equity, inclusion, justice are important topics for the School of Management. We take them seriously, not just because they are the right thing to do, because a lot of wrongs from the past and the present have to be righted, but also because it prepares you for your future careers in environments that are going to be diverse, that will require you to work towards inclusion and creating equity in your positions and to work towards justice in a business environment. To get there, of course, requires change in our attitudes, in our behavior, and corporate behavior also. And that's, I guess, the topic that we're dealing with here today. Hey, Marvin. We are dealing with the topic of managing yourself through change in our DEI in the Workplace series. I want to thank my colleagues, John Garcia, Kyle McIntosh, and Mary Jo Shane, Earl Charles, and a few others, staff members, of course, also, who have worked hard at putting this event together, and to our panelists, who will be introduced in a moment. So enjoy the show, I almost said. Enjoy the panel, enjoy the event, and please get engaged with questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, welcome everybody. So thank you for investing your time with us today. My name is John Garcia, part of the faculty here at the School of Management, where I teach finance and analytics. And so today we're going to be discussing managing yourself through change. And we're going to be exploring this topic with our fabulous panelists here today. And this change is going to be something we are all going to be inevitably encounter in our lifetimes. It's something that no matter who you are, we're going to experience change. And in this case, no matter where you're at, whether you're a first-year student or you graduated last millennium, like I did, we hope that you walk away with something new, maybe a new perspective, an idea, or maybe at a minimum a quesadilla. And the learnings that we'll take away from here today, we hope that you're going to be able to apply them again, no matter where you are in your journey. So the format we'll use today here is we'll do a brief introduction of the panelists, and then I'll transition into a brief discussion kind of set up for today's discussion, and then we'll go and start discussing some questions that will center around certain themes around managing ourselves through change. And then we'll wrap up and have about 10-15 minutes of Q&A. And then we can have some additional time to enjoy some more quesadillas and mingle with our wonderful panelists. Sound good? Okay. All right, so I'm going to use this to control my phone. I'm not checking my Twitter feed or anything like this. I'm just changing the slides as you see. That's what I'm doing. And so we're joined by 4 fabulous panelists. And so we'll have them introduce themselves here in a second. The one thing you see that's in common amongst all of us here is that they all have a smile, so they're all very happy to be here. We also had a great hair day, picture day, except myself. I've been having a hard time on the hair front, but nonetheless, we'll go ahead and get started with some introductions. So we'll start here with Marvin.
Sure. My name is Marvin Boateng. I'm Director of Lending for the Economic Development Collaborative.
Marvin, you need to hit that. There you go.
Sorry, Marvin Boateng, Director of Lending for the Economic Development Collaborative here in Ventura County. Graduate of CLU. I also do some underwriting for the Black Cooperative Investment Fund in LA, and I do some private equity work as well.
So good morning, my name is Michele Wilson, and I have been an entrepreneur for 30 plus years. I've been a single mom and really started my last business out of my son's hospital room, out of need. But I graduated from the University of Phoenix with a management degree, and I work with startups and mom entrepreneurs. And we also have a magazine called Lit Magazine. It's Leaders in Transformation. So I'm all about coaching and training and uplifting the community.
Hi, good morning. I'm Deanna Oroz, and I'm the Director of Strategic Operations in the Center for Excellence at Kite Pharmaceutical. Been in the biopharm area industry for over 20 plus years, but I'm also proud that I'm an adjunct professor here, teaching in the EMBA courses and the MBA courses with supply chain and international business.
Hi everyone, my name is Roepke. I'm the Director of Athletics here at Cal Lutheran. I've been in the role just over 10 months now. Been back to campus about a year. I'm an alum of Cal Lutheran for my undergrad and University of South Dakota graduate for my master's program.
All right, well, welcome everybody. So before we jump into the panelist questions, I want to just do a quick setup. And so here we're talking about change. And change is inevitable no matter who you are or where you're at in your life. And for me, personally, change has been very near and dear to my heart. It's being a first generation high school student and college grads to graduate from my family, and having been born to immigrant parents, working in agriculture, learning English as a second language, all that led to change for me, and something that as I reflect back on my career, I spent 21 years in industry, and now I'm a professor here. It's certainly one of the things that is, I think, important for our success is how we manage change as it occurs. And I really strongly believe that the themes and the things we're going to be talking about today in today's panel are going to be critical for you to reflect on, to assess what that means to you, and how you can learn from that to adapt to change, lean into change, and actually thrive on change. So that's what we're talking about. And now one change that we've probably all been exposed to, all humanity has been exposed to, is COVID. All of us are still enduring some of that change. And COVID has actually had a disparate impact on certain communities, particularly the Black and indigenous and people of color community, the BIPOC community. If you look at certain studies, over 55% of those who have contracted COVID have been from BIPOC communities, even though they only represent less than a third of the population. When we look at the mortality rates of the BIPOC communities is 2 times higher than that of Caucasian communities. And it's also had a very significant impact on education. You might have seen this actually last night on NBC 90 News, where one of the lead stories that they had was that education amongst all students has actually deteriorated in the last few years since COVID. And the study that was done, that they're reporting on, where they looked at 4th and 8th graders, where only 26% of students were proficient in math and only 33% were proficient in reading. But there's been studies that show that the BIPOC children have been more disadvantaged in their education over the last few years. And that's what we see here on the right, where these students in the BIPOC communities are further behind. And one of the reasons why this is important is because we know that education is the biggest predictor of a household's wealth, no matter what race you're from. And that's what we're seeing here in this slide, where the more education you have, generally the higher the household wealth. And also, families that typically have more wealth are generally going to be better positioned to manage change as it unfolds. And so the negative effect of the COVID on BIPOC communities' education is potentially something that is going to perpetuate and affect these households in the future as well. And again, household wealth is one of the reasons why typically households are better able to manage change, which is one of the reasons why you typically see the rich get richer. And in this chart, what we're seeing here on the left are a breakout of the average household wealth by the Black and Hispanic communities versus others. And you can see here that it's been flat over the years. And furthermore, what we see on the right is generally the wealthier are getting wealthier, whereas the bottom 50% of individuals from a wealth perspective have had stagnant wealth over the last 20 years. those in the upper is really where you're seeing the growth and wealth. Now, we can't just make money kind of rain down from the sky here and change our wealth situation to manage change, to more effectively manage change. But there are things that we can do to help us position ourselves to manage and better adapt and thrive with change, which is what we're talking about here today. And it starts with one simple thing, and that is knowing yourself. And that brings me into this quote from Peter Drucker, the late Peter Drucker, who passed away not too long ago. And he says, "Success in the knowledge economy comes to those who know themselves, their strengths, their values, and how they best perform." He also created a framework, which is actually the basis of our discussion today, and that framework is called Managing Oneself. And in that framework, the insights that he brings is that managing oneself effectively is about recognizing first what are our strengths, and then how do I best perform, recognizing how do I best perform, how do I learn, how do I best learn, what are my values, and how do I find a place for me where my values align with the organization so I can thrive, and then lastly, what should I contribute? So we're going to just touch on some of these, and there's actually a handout in your sheet that gives you a little bit more context around this framework, so I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. And one thing that I'd like us to do is, if you have your phones, because I think all of you, it's not like an extra limb, it's attached to us at all times. So if you have your phone with you, I'm going to put out instructions here on some polling. So throughout the remainder of the session, I'll be asking you some questions to kind of see where you're at in your journey and to get some insights from you. So you can either go to menti.com and then input this code, or scan this barcode. I will tell you, I just saw this morning that if you're connected to the CLU server, it may give you an error in loading the presentation. So if you're using your phone, just turn off the Wi-Fi and it should work fine, if you do get that error. So I'll give you a second to do that. And as you do that, as I mentioned in that framework, Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker, first step in that process was identifying your strengths. What are your strengths? So therefore, the first question that I have for you, in the audience here, is, do you know what your top 3 strengths are? If you didn't get a chance to get that code, it's up on here, it's on top as well. Just go to menti.com and input that code on the very top. Okay, so go ahead and give me your thoughts on this. Okay, so looks like not quite half, but maybe 60% of you said yes, 40% of you are saying not sure. Okay. So many of you do know, what your strengths are. A couple of you may not know that. So here's what I'd like to do now is I'm going to turn it to our panelists here. And the first question that I have for the panel, which you can see the question on your phone as well if you're still on Menti, is what strategies have you used to identify your strengths, and how have you used that knowledge to guide your career? So I'm going to start with Deanna.
Yeah. So when I think about my strengths, I usually don't start out with my experience in the pharmaceutical industry or my background in procurement or any accomplishments I have. I always lead with a strength that I have. So by gaining feedback from my coworkers, from my peers, and believe it or not, the course evaluations that students fill out, and taking personality tests, I learned that one of my key characteristics is a strong leader. So I take that characteristics, and when I'm talking to others, I make sure I emphasize that to make me distinct from others. And then I take that characteristic again of being a strong leader, and then I apply it to the job that I'm interviewing for, the project that I'm working on, whatever that may be. So understanding what those strengths are by getting that feedback from others or by taking personality tests that are free online, it's really helped me to understand what kind of what characteristic I have. And there's some that are pros and there's some that are cons, but it also helps you change when you find out about those characteristics.
Thank you, Deanna. Anybody else want to add?
I could say something. I would say my strengths lie with where I'm excited the most, what excites me the most. It even goes back into school when I was an undergrad. There was a couple subjects I really liked. One was economics and the other was African American studies. And somehow professionally I found a way to be able to do that. What excited me was learning how to work with small businesses, and then working with black businesses, studying black history and trying to figure out what are some of the issues. So when I actually got into banking, I started off as a teller. I hated being a teller. I almost got fired for being a teller. Luckily, I was successful enough to actually make it to be a personal banker. And there I started to actually work with small businesses. And I said, yeah, I'm passionate about this. And I started to take courses in banking in regards to business lending. And I got so good at business lending. I became a manager. Now I'm the director of lending out here running a loan program for Ventura and Santa Barbara County. So it really starts with what excites you the most. And you try to align, what you learn through experience, what excites you. And when you're excited about something, you're going to try to figure it out and do really well at it. When you're good at something and you don't like doing it, you're going to make mistakes. That's just my experience there. So try to find what excites you the most. You start in school, what subjects do you like? Get into the workforce, play around a little bit, kind of figure out, I like this, I like that, or I don't like this. Jot it down and then work hard to get to what excites you the most. And that's where I'm at in my life.
Thank you.
I would like to add also, one of my mentors always said that, the first step in change is awareness. So I've worked extra hard on just really understanding my strength, and I've taken like the SWOT test, which is actually a business tool, but I used it personally, right? I looked at my strengths, my weaknesses, my opportunities, and threats. So, there's things in business, I've used them for my personal, to help me grow. I've used the DISC assessment. I take a lot of personal development courses, and I go to conferences, and really understanding my strength, and one of those is communication. So I've taken class and really understand what it means to be a great communicator. It's not what I say or what I'm trying to, it's really about understanding the other person. So for me, knowing that that is my strength, I continually work at learning more about that. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think the tools is an important piece as well. So we utilize Strengths Finder in my class, a book that you take an assessment, you're able to identify what your strengths are, and then we talk about what that looks like to lead from your strengths. A lot of times we think about being deficit-based, working on the things we don't have and that we're not strong at. And so we flip that for an entire semester and talk about how do we lead from strength, from a place of strength, from our own strengths, and what does that look like to work with others. And that's another piece that DISC also talks a lot about, is how do you work with others that don't have the same alignment that you do. But I think tools is another useful piece of this conversation.
Thank you, Holly. Strengths Finder. We actually have 4 copies of that book here.
Okay.
So if you, first 4 who ask a question, they love this book. So find out what your 4 strengths are using this tool. One common theme you probably heard throughout was the plural word tools. There was not one tool that everyone said, we're going to use this one tool, right? And I would say we're all unique individuals. And so what speaks to us may be different than what speaks to somebody else. So getting multiple perspectives from multiple people, multiple dimensions of tools can better help us, guide us on what exactly are our strengths and how can we kind of manage ourselves more effectively from a position of strength, as Holly mentioned. One of the things that we started out discussing was the fact that change is inevitable. It's going to occur to everybody. So I want to ask all of you, have you experienced significant change in the last 12 months? If you reflect back, have you experienced significant change? So most So far, we got about 90% people saying yes, 10% or so saying no. So change is going to occur, and it's going to affect us all. And I started out with saying that oftentimes our success in life hinges on how we actually manage change and how we confront change. And so with that, I want to move to our next question for the panel, which is, what change have you recently experienced, and how did you manage yourself through that change? So we're going to start with Michele.
Thank you so much. This past year, I've actually been working with a team, an international team. We launched a magazine called Lit Magazine, and our company grew really fast because we have it in Spanish and in English. And so we have a team in Mexico, and then we have a team all around the country, and we met virtually. And as we continue to grow, we noticed that some of our team members were working really hard, and then some weren't, working at all. And so we really had to make a decision how we were going to move forward. So we use tools, right? Because we always find one of the things of Diddy, he talks about it's not the people, it's the system. And so we realized we didn't have the systems in place for growth. So we're actually going back and restructuring our company, and and we want to use like job descriptions to really say, hey, if you are performing to the job description, then you can stay. If not, then you're going to have to go. But it's really hard because we're a family now, and although we want to continue to grow and scale our business, for those that are not contributing, they're weighing our company down. And so we have to find ways that we can be very diplomatic as far as saying, thank you for joining us on this journey, but at this point in time, we can't go forward because based on your performance. And we've given them multiple chances. That's what's really hard, because we all have this vision. However, it's not fair to others. So we're almost going to close down the company. We're like, why are we going to do this for 3 people when we have a whole team? So we just have to have those difficult conversations, but we use systems as opposed to the person and their personality and what they do. We're just saying, hey, you didn't perform based on this, and this. So that's how we're handling change in our company.
Thank you.
Well, about a year ago, I made a very big change in leaving a very large biopharmaceutical company that I was very comfortable with. But as you all know, the Great Resignation happened starting a couple years ago. I had 30% of my workforce that was resigning, and I couldn't retain them. And they've been there for 20 years, 10 years. They were making good money. You need to change and you need to adapt. And we had to adapt, and how we did it was through empathy. Understanding what was going on within your team and connecting in those ways. There were people that had mothers and fathers that were dying from COVID, right? And they couldn't come into work. They were going to resign, and I couldn't lose another person within my team. You need to adapt to changes like this. I also run supply chain. Can you imagine what happened when COVID hit? We needed to all get together. We needed to make plans. We had to have backup plans. We had to go to plan B instead of plan A. I mean, I'm sure all of you had problems getting toilet paper, right? I mean, I bought a bidet, right? I never thought I'd buy a bidet, but there's things that you've got to do that really aren't what you normally would do. But changing and adapting is extremely important, not only in your life, but also in business.
Anybody else want to add anything? So one common theme that you're kind of hearing here is you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable a little bit, right? You're going to lean into change that you may not be comfortable with because it's going to happen whether you want it or not. And so what can we control? We can't control change from occurring or not, but we can control how we react to it and what we do as a consequence of it. And that's kind of one of the constant themes we've kind of heard here thus far. All right, so let me now go to another question here, and this is for the audience. And one of the things that Drucker points out is that to be our best, we need to find a place where our own values align with the organizational values. And so, in order to do that, we need to know what our values are. And so, I want just you to reflect here for a second and just type in, what are your 3 values that come to mind for you? So type in some words or words that come to mind, and see kind of where you're at. So we'll see a little word clock here. So again, it's all anonymous. And so some of the words coming up here: compassion, honesty, transparency are some of the integrity are the ones coming up. And starting honesty seems to be kind of one of the bigger ones. Faith, resolve, loyalty. So this is all going to be unique to us as individuals, right? Because we're all different. And as we can see here from this very colorful word cloud, where we have a lot of different perspectives around how we define value for us as an individual. And this is an important part of knowing yourself as well, that you want to reflect on it. And now let me turn to the panel here and ask the question on what are your top 3 values and how have they guided your career? So we're going to go to Holly for this one.
So I'm going to start with a really quick story. I was, previous to being in athletic administration, I was teaching. I was teaching 7th through 12th grade in a private school. I loved it. I'd always wanted to be a teacher. I loved my work, but I constantly questioned, is this what I'm going to do the rest of my life? You do the same thing day in and day out, year in and year out, right? You have the same conversation every year because you have a new group of students come in. 2 weeks before the start of school in 2011, I got a call. My school was closing, and I no longer had a job. I had just spent, as teachers do, all the money to decorate my classroom, to buy supplies for my classroom. I was planning on putting those up within the next week, and I had no job. I was actually in school at the time here at Cal Lutheran, going through the PROS program. I didn't know what to do, right? And in that moment, you question everything. Fortunately, I immediately looked at people around me. It was literally right at the time of graduation. The graduation happened later that year, and so anyone that I connected with at graduation, I connected, right? I asked them for advice. I asked them what they could do to give me some insight as to what next. In that moment in August, I reached out to everyone around me. I told them kind of what had happened. I was able to find a job. It was the intent was going to be a 9-month, 10-month job, and that's what it was, so kind of to the day. But when I was then able to transition to athletic administration, someone took a chance on me, took a chance on my resume, hired me into athletic administration, which was a start, right? I hadn't done this previously. I had been a teacher, so I really had to explain all my transferable skills, right? I had to show, right, that my experience was transferable to this new career. Was able to do that. Someone took a chance, got in, and then I needed to catch up, right? So I was behind. I'm a little bit older, starting a new career. I needed to catch up, and so I went to all programming education I could. The NCAA puts on a ton of programming for up-and-coming professionals, and so I went to everything I could. At one point, I did 7 different programs in 4 weeks. I was flying back and forth across the country. I flew from where I was living to Chicago to Indianapolis to Philadelphia, back to Indianapolis to San Diego, back to Indianapolis to home. To be able to get in as many of these programs, I applied for everything I could. And that's where I learned that values matter, right? And that I need to know what my values are. And I need to be able to make decisions and live through my values. And I need to question, right? So when I look at different roles, when I look at different responsibilities, I need to lean to my values to know if this is a right fit. So when I came to Cal Lutheran, my values are what I was looking at. My values are integrity, they are analytics, and it's creativity. And somebody, you look and you're like, not all those go, right? Like how are you analytical and creative at the same time, right? But I look at what I do, and those are exactly what needs to happen. I need to work with integrity, and for everyone around me, everyone in front of me, student athletes, our coaches, other professionals in the industry. I need to be data informed. I need to be data driven in what I do, and I need to be creative. There's some things I have to do in ways that no one has ever done before, and I've got to figure that out. I look at the partnerships. I was involved with the Angel City Partnership, and I look at that organization. That's exactly who they are, right? That's why it was a fit for me. It made sense, right? They're doing things that no one have ever done before. They're very creative, but they're data driven in the way they're doing it. They've done it in ways that no one else has, and it's paid dividends for them. They did make the playoffs this year, and they received more free media than any other team in the league. Everyone was talking about them, even though they were done with their season. It's still continuing. So it's phenomenal. But to be able to identify that that is a fit based on my values is super important. I would say that I also know what kind of sets me off, right? So if someone says this is the way we've always done it, so that's the way we're going to do it, that doesn't align with my values at all, right? That's not working with integrity. It's not meeting the needs of the people in front of me. If we're just doing it because it's always been done, it doesn't meet everyone's needs, right? So I need to be data driven, and I want to find creative solutions to get there.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything?
I would like to add. So my top 3 is love, compassion, and faith. And as a single mom, my oldest is 40 years old, so I have to love him unconditionally and just really understand that we all have untapped potential. So I have taken that love into my business, which means when I'm working with a client or working with a team member, you know, I look at their untapped potential, and it's not about the behavior, it's about helping them to grow, to transform their lives. So, you know, love has been a working factor for me in my business and in my personal life. So that's my top 4 values.
Thank you.
I can add something as well. I work with businesses that are not bankable, so naturally when they call me, they're very frustrated because they feel like they have a great idea, you know, and no one's listening to them and no one can finance them. So it starts with compassion for me. And I've been really good over the years of, you know, really inspiring businesses, letting them know that, hey, we're going to find a solution. So being compassionate is very important. Being a hard worker is also very important as well, because I understand that if some of these businesses don't get financing, they're going to go out of business. And so it's really important to combine the compassion with the hard work, then also being upright. You know, integrity is a huge part of what we do. I'm dealing with finances, and I lend up to $250,000. I do a lot of lending throughout the year. So integrity, compassion, hard work are really, really important values.
Thank you. So one of the constant themes we kind of heard here was that knowing your values ultimately going to make your decision making much easier as far as what you do next, right? And so oftentimes one of the harder things that we can do is kind of what decision do we make, and the kind of what we heard, and also kind of the framework that Drucker presents is having clarity around your values can facilitate you figuring out what is the right decision for you. All right, so let me now transition to kind of a continued discussion around a similar topic, which is from the managing oneself kind of framework, where Drucker mentions that for us to be performing at our best, we need to find a place where our values, how we best perform, and our strengths kind of intersect. Doing that will enable us to go from the mediocre to really a high performer. And so this also kind of brings me to this quote here, which is says that, you know, growth is painful, change is painful, but nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. And so ultimately, we kind of reflect on where do we belong. Let's kind of get into what is our purpose. So I'd like you to reflect on that for a second, and I want to ask you, do you have a clear sense of your purpose? So go ahead and tell me your thoughts on that. Okay, so most of you are saying yes, but it's still evolving. A few of you are pretty certain that you have locked those down, and a few of you are still working that out. So this kind of brings me to another question for the panel here. And that question is, transition the slide here, is how will you describe your purpose and how do you find it? And has it evolved over time? And so I'm gonna go to Marvin to start on this one.
I guess, it's interesting because the answers of evolving just kind of understand. I think you find your purpose just kind of as you walk through life. You're collecting pieces of the puzzle as you go. In college, I was very active on campus. I was in clubs and organizations. I got into a leadership position there. And that leadership position translated into banking. When I started at the lowest tier, which was as a teller. But everyone kind of figured like this guy had some leadership skills and things like that. As I kind of grew in banking, I found my purpose that, I really want to help small businesses access capital, and that's through debt financing. That's my specialty, and I absolutely love it. And so, within that purpose, I, been able to do other things. I do work in regards to private equity, so I was able to take this purpose and this talent and the skill set to move into other areas. So I would say, in short, that I discovered my purpose just really walking through life and collecting all these different pieces to the puzzle and putting it together, just really thinking back and saying, what really interested me, what moves me the most, what would I actually do for free, and I literally would go to work. I could go into work right now and do what I'm doing for free because I love seeing business packages, I love reading business plans, I love talking to small businesses. So that's really my purpose. My purpose, in life, I feel like I'm here and I can do much more with that skill set. So I discovered it just by walking through life.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'll go. For me, I really didn't discover my purpose until later in life. I really didn't understand what purpose meant. I was a single mom. I went to school, got a college degree and worked, but I always seemed like I was struggling financially. And then about 13 years, an event happened in my life that changed my life. And when I started actually working with a company who really focused on leadership, we actually wrote a vision statement for our personal life and a mission statement. And through that, it was a journey that when I understood my vision and my mission, I'm actually just stepping into my purpose over the last few years. But just really having that intention, writing it down and really understanding, I knew that I was here for a purpose, that all my experiences over the years wasn't for me, it was for me to be able to understand other people and help them through their journey. So that's how I discovered my purpose.
Thank you.
So I found my purpose 2 years ago today. My dad died of cancer. And I looked at my current job and I thought, is that what I want to do? The reason why my dad really, was hurt and he died was because he didn't gain access to specific new cancer therapies. There's people all over the United States that don't know that there are different types of therapies that you can go and you could be in these clinical trials. And I realized that my dad didn't gain access to any of those medications or the opportunity to go to those clinical trials. I quit my job, a really good job, to go to a new company that does something that is innovative, that is new, for cancer patients to go into, which is called cell therapy. 2 years ago, it wasn't even approved, but they were doing clinical trials. When it got approved, I made it my purpose in life to go to that company, to find it, to get a job, so that I can make sure that people all over the United States know that there are different therapies that they can try if they're at their wit's end and they have gone through chemo and radiation and all of that. There are other ways. So I've made my sorrow of my dad's death into my purpose in life.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I'll just acknowledge a shift happening right now. So I think, honestly, when I think about it, I think my purpose in life is to figure out what my purpose is, right? And I think it keeps revealing itself, right, in new ways because I continue to grow, I continue to evolve. There are things, right? I watch a lot of HGTV, right? And I had no idea that today I would walk out of my office as an interior designer, right? I'm choosing flooring samples for our new offices. We're moving walls. We're like, when did that, like how does that happen, right? But that's where my passion lies, right? I love that. It's the creative side coming out. But then I look at how it plays into what I do professionally and how that can add value to be able to inform some of my work, which I had no idea I would be doing this today. But I think, you know, if you ask me today what my purpose is, I coach coaches, right? And it aligns with everything I've done. I thought I was a teacher. I hated being a teacher. I never called myself a teacher. I always wanted to instill learning. I didn't feel like I had any value to teach anyone anything. I wanted to create purpose. I wanted to create a passion of learning. And because that's something that I personally have. And so then I look at what do I love to learn? I love to learn about leadership. In my free time, I watch HGTV, you know, and then I pick a career in which all these things come together. So, yeah, I think it's evolving. I think I'm okay saying I haven't figured it out yet, and I'm okay to continue to learn.
Thank you. So one constant theme you heard there is the word evolving and the reflecting. Right? So it's never going to be a linear kind of progress. There's a level of zigzagging up and down, but it all kind of comes down to self-reflection and kind of reflecting on your experiences and how you can use that to hone in on defining what is your purpose, what makes you happy. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to maximize our happiness with the limited number of days we have on Earth, and that's finding that purpose and doing something that enables us to deliver on purposes. It enables that to occur. Okay, so we're going to shift now to Q&A. We've got about 7 minutes before 12:20, so we had an extra question, but we're going to leave that for later. And so we're going to go ahead and transition to a Q&A. And I'll also be putting a little bit later after the Q&A a survey for you to complete as well. But for the time being, is there any questions that anybody has in the audience? Remember, there's a free book at stake here, Strange Finder. So, questions?
How has your...
It'll be a good question. So.
How has your upbringing and identity contributed to, you know, how you behave in your workplace?
I'll go ahead and answer. Well, for me, I was very thankful and grateful that I had a mom and dad who raised me with Christian values, even though I kind of bucked them when I was young. But later in life, I really appreciate it. So it gave me that foundation to have integrity and honesty and really have faith. You know, there's a lot of things in my life that's happened that if it wasn't for God and faith, I don't know how I would have got through it. So it was really, I didn't understand at the time when I was young, but as I got older, I really see that that foundation that my mom and dad gave me was really important.
I'd like to answer that one. Both my parents did not finish high school. So I remember graduating from high school and I thought, oh, I could just apply to any college and get in. I didn't even understand that you had to have the grades and you had to apply a year before and take an SAT. So when I started that education journey and then getting my master's here, when I went into my professional career, I joined a lot of groups. We had a lot of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I made it just a goal to me to make sure that I'm mentoring other Hispanic women. I went out into the community, talked to schools, asked how I could help. I go to a lot of fairs as well, talking on behalf of mentorship and how important it is, and to make sure that we're guiding all individuals regardless of the race.
I would say the same thing. I would say I'm a combination of my mom and dad. Dad's a very generous guy, outgoing. Mom, she's very reserved, great saver, I ended up in finance that way, but then I also discovered myself as well. So I'm a kind of a combination of everybody and in the community that I grew up in. I grew up in a low-income community, and so I have compassion, to serve those that are less fortunate and underserved groups. So that upbringing has steered me into, what I studied in school and trying to figure out some of the problems that, I saw growing up, and led me into where I'm at right now. So I'm everything. My community, Canal and San Rafael, my parents, just everything. So, yeah.
Other questions out there?
A common theme was like adaptability, and I was wondering how adaptability has played a part in your lives becoming people in leadership positions.
So I think one of my favorite quotes is from John Wooden, who's a legendary basketball coach. And he says that adaptability is the ability to adjust when the situation changes at any given time. And COVID changed everything for corporate offices, in corporate. If we didn't change, we would have went down. We didn't have supply chain. We never worked. We worked in silos a lot before, fixing our own problems right within our departments. What we had to do is we had to get together as a group, and we had to fix the problem across our company. And that never happened before. And now that that has happened, now we're constantly collaborating together. We have collaboration tools constantly where people are putting questions and people in different areas are answering, which didn't happen. We adapted to that. I mean, I teach one of the EMBA courses. Do you know how hard it was to teach online and you don't know if people are paying attention to you, right? When you're now teaching all via Zoom. And so you had to adapt. I started using Miro as a collaboration tool, right? I started reading about all these other things that could help bring in those students so that they're listening. I had every single camera on and people were using and collaborating. They started meeting together. You've got to adapt, because I would have failed those students if I didn't adapt and change the way that I was teaching. I couldn't just sit there and speak to everybody. I had to make it interactive, and I think that's why adaptability is so important. Not only in teaching, but also in your life.
I would say the same thing as well. Prior to COVID at my office, the EDC, Economic Development Collaborative, we saw about 800 clients annually. When COVID happened, it was March of 2020. I had like 400 businesses call my office distressed in 1 week. So we had to quickly adapt as a team. Hire some more people. We kept our core values the same. We kept it fun at the office. We were all there, just doing great work. But we had to adapt by bringing more people in. That year, we went from 800 clients to 3,000 clients just in 1 year. So we had to adapt really quickly. I started a loan program literally like a week and a half after the shutdown happened. I created a loan program to help small business right away to get capital. This was before SBA started their EIDL and the PPP. We had to respond immediately. So yeah, you have to be flexible and you have to adapt really quickly to help people.
So we can continue to, thank you for that. We can continue to ask questions, but before you leave, if you can just go ahead and complete the survey that's on Menti. But I saw another hand over here.
We know some of you guys need to leave for a 12:25 class, so if you do need to leave, feel free to go on.
Hello, my question is if you've ever worked with someone who has different values than you do and have butted heads a little bit and maybe not have gone along, how do you compromise and communicate with someone who's might be a little bit difficult?
Good question.
This is my daily. Right, I work with, currently we have 15 head coaches coaching 22 athletic programs here at Cal Lutheran. And so it's bound to happen, right? Whoops. And so really it's coming to an understanding, right? I ask a ton of questions. You know, I'm proposed a question or I'm proposed an idea, and if it's something that may not align with me or what I hope the institution would stand for, I ask a lot of questions about what that looks like. You know, if we want to enter into partnership or relationship with different companies for different things, or just different ideas. You know, a coach says, you know, I want this for me, and I see that it, you know, my job is to serve the whole. And so, you know, if I have a team or a program wanting to do something for themselves, I have to ask the question of how does it serve the whole. Sometimes I have to say no just to say no, right? And we can talk it through, and this happens every day. And I have to say no because I see the bigger picture. But you know, it's a respectful conversation. And hopefully, right, there's a whole culture that's built, right, around trust, around being trustworthy, around being trusted, and around trusting others. And so it's a lot, right? I'm new, right? And so I'm 10 months in and I'm doing all these things at once. I'm trying to build this culture. I'm trying to build a culture of trust and respect and responsibility, as well as working the day in and day out and making decisions as we go. And so it's a lot. It's sometimes, you know, when people don't agree or they don't see it your way and they don't trust that decision a whole lot, it makes it tough. But that you know, sometimes that's just the job, right? And no one guaranteed that it would be easy.
So for me, I've learned to take 100% responsibility of my actions. Whether I'm right or wrong, I just take 100% responsibility, which means I really do my best to see the perspective of the other person and whether they're right or wrong. And so it just takes extra work. I listen a lot, you know, I listen not to respond, and I just tend to, it just takes work to work through that disagreement or that conflict, but I find out through the end, when I'm taking 100% responsibility, I just don't take it personally, and it has allowed me to keep the relationships and so forth. Sometimes it works out as far as what we're working on, and sometimes it doesn't, but at least the relationship is still there.
Anybody else have questions?
Wait, I want to answer that one real quick, if that's okay, because I have I work with somebody that we definitely need to adapt and we needed to change. And I don't think it was her value to change. She'd been there 15 years, she continuously did that. It came to the point where she needed to make the decision if she was going to adapt or if she needed to leave. And it was a very hard decision for her, but we were going in a different direction. After COVID hit, we had to change. We had to be streamline things, change our software, change the way we do things, change suppliers. It was too much for her. So she ended up quitting and moving out of the industry. But there's a time where you need to think about what your values are, and if somebody's are different, that you might have to make that decision that this might not be the place for you. And so know that that is something that you might need to do.
Thank you. I saw a hand in the back.
All right, free book. Hi, so you guys talked a lot about leadership throughout the entire talk. Some of you even mentioned that leadership was a strength of yours that you recognized. But I'm curious to know, like, what is your definition of leadership, or how do you frame leadership? Because you can say like, oh, I'm a leader, but like, what does that mean? And that changes depending on the person. So if you want to go through.
For me, actually, I've defined leadership as really helping people grow. I believe that, as I was talking earlier about, everyone has potential within them, and so my responsibility is to help people grow into leadership. It's not about having followers. And it's also being, like that role model. And I talk about effective leadership is really understanding what works, what doesn't, and abandoning what doesn't work. So it's constantly learning, but that's what leadership means to me. It's like when I'm in an organization, a business, my clients, it's helping them to get the end result that they want in their life or in their business. So that's what leadership means to me.
Yeah, I love the book by John Maxwell called The 5 Levels of Leadership. To me, I really live my life or my professional career by that. There's 5 levels. First level, you get the job, you get the position, right? It's just a position. If you're going and nobody's following you, you're just taking a walk. You're not leading anyone. But the second one is when you have to gain their respect. You really have to understand your people. I try to find out 3 things about every single person that works with me or for me. And I have to understand them, have to be empathetic towards them, compassionate towards them, and really understand what's going on in their life. The third, of course, is you need to produce if you're a leader. If you don't produce, you're not going to keep that position very, very long, right? The next one is really making sure that you are leading others. If you don't lead others, then people think that you're just somebody who produces, but you can't train others to produce. To me, I love to train. During my classes when I teach in supply chain and procurement, I make sure that they get just as excited about procurement as I am. I teach them a lot about real world activities that happen. And then of course, just like I've heard, you need to be able to make sure that the people that you just trained are training others, right? Because when you leave, you need to make sure that that business can continue on. So when I think about leadership, I think about all the different levels, and it changes with every job, because I might have been way up there training others at one job, and when I moved to this new job 3 months ago, I had to start back on level 1 again. I got the position, great. Had to start gaining respect, right? Now I'm producing. I need to work my way up, and I think that's very important.
I got a question. How do you hedge against risks when it comes to lending to smaller businesses?
It's a good question. It's interesting because I actually had a chance to really think about it. Because so I lend to small businesses that are not bankable, and our default rates just from an industry is much higher. Some places it's 10%, 20%, 50%. I'm actually at 3.4% over 10 years, which is really good. And about 92% of my startups succeed. And here's the one thing that I actually discovered by reading all the business plans again. I'm like, why did this brewery succeed? Why did this one not succeed? Why did this ice cream shop succeed? Why did this ice cream shop not succeed? And I found out that it was in the go-to market strategy. That was the most important part. So when I actually look at the business plan, I need to figure out who you are. I want to, kind of understand, like, do you have the industry experience? Do you have any business ownership experience? And what problem are you trying to solve? But the most important thing is, how are you going to get that first client? There was a brewery, a very popular brewery, that came into my office 10 years ago. And I declined them for a loan because I did the math on the projections, and I was just like, you're going to have to serve like 10,000 bottles of beer in order to succeed. Well, 5 years later, this company is in partnership with a private equity firm. I made a mistake right there, And so I said, once I started to realize that, and we're all cool, great friends. I didn't lose anything, so I didn't lose any money. But, I read that business plan again, I was like, darn. These guys, they have the sales and marketing experience, and they told me exactly how they're going to get that first client. And that's the one thing that I did notice in all the business plans. They had a really good go-to-market strategy. I approved a loan recently for a company that wants to can some cacao beverages, and I'm like, carbonated cacao beverages, what's that? I know cocoa, it's great, but in the business plan, they said that in addition to producing this carbonated cacao beverage, we're also going to can for smaller scale breweries and other food companies. And they presented me 14 LOIs from people saying, if these guys get started, we are going to use them to can our beverages. And I was like, $250,000 right there, you know? So I do love industry experience, you know, people that have an understanding of the industry, the market they're entering to. The go-to market strategy is really important. And then the projections are important. I do need to kind of understand, how are you going to make money and how are you going to pay me back? Because again, you know, it's a loan, I need to be paid back. But I look at those core things there. And then I do look at collateral because I deal with businesses that are not bankable and there's some issues. They might have credit issues or they might not have the collateral. You know, someone wants $200,000, but you know, they only have $10,000 worth of collateral. So I've got to make that decision. So I look at the business plan, trying to figure out, is this a good strategy? And you know, we try to figure it out from there. So it's a combination of everything.
Thank you.